Stay with us. Professor Swaran Singh is also with us. Swaran, take it or leave it. Is it that easy? Who really stands to lose more if India decides to levy reciprocatory tariffs on the United States? Who stands to lose big?
I think more than who stands to lose is to look at what are the leverages and compulsions which will guide their negotiations. I want to remind your reviewers of the 2018 RCEP Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which at that time was also seen very ambitious, and India was constantly engaged in those negotiations, but had to walk out of it in the very last hour because of sensitivity to our labor intensive sectors. And same thing, whether it is agriculture, dairy, textiles, jewelry, even pharmaceuticals. India has been trying to indicate and make concessions from the February budget onwards, and Prime Minister's visit in February onwards have been talking about negotiating at least a mini deal. But there are difficulties as to how far India can go, and to me RCEP is a good example, and Americans should look at how far they can push India in making concessions. Second, I think it is also not just the economic issues, but also politics. You mentioned India's membership of BRICS that President Trump disdains. He's often angry about it. He's also mentioning now India's purchase of enormous amount of defense equipment and energy from Russia, funding Putin's war in Ukraine, as he says. And of course, India and China are clubbed in that together in that sense. And then, of course, the very fact that, India is potentially seen as not like China. China, as example, doesn't replicate with India. China is able to push things much harder. But China was also able to make concession during the first term of President Trump. They had concession of buying $250 billion of additional imports from United States, the kind of gesture Chinese could make. India has very different kind of approach in negotiating, in looking at larger picture of a relationship in terms of defense equipment, joint production, joint research, and so on, largest democracy and everything else on the board. But let me also say, it's important to note that on Monday only, USTR, US Trade Representative's speeches, his statements had indicated likelihood of extension beyond 1st August. So I wouldn't completely rule out that, tomorrow or 24 hours later, you could see another tweet from Trump. After all, he has also very recently signed similar deals with European Union, with Japan, with Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, and UK, largely between 15 to 20% of tariffs on imports from these countries in that sense. So there could be some possibility of a sort of leeway between two sides. I don't think, India is among the top 10 trading partners of United States. So I think they will also have to look back and see how far they can push. Whether they would like to, see that there is
Trump
no
at the
trade
helm, so that makes it all the more nerve-wracking. Professor Swaran, a final word from you on the ties between India and the United States. Are we seeing a slow meltdown, or is this just Trump's negotiation style?
I think it is the Trump negotiation style, and I think we should not worry about his harsh language and tough tweets. He's done it to all his friends all the time. A good model for us is not China, it's European Union. He was equally angry with European Union, which is now promising to buy defense equipment from United States, buy energy from United States, promise future investments in United States. That's a good model for India, and I think we can have enormous leeways in buying energy, buying defense equipment, and some of the Indian firms potentially could also help him in onshoring in terms of starting production in the United States. These are possibilities to explore, but making concessions in core areas where he's asking, which is where our labor-intensive exports are, I don't think India has a leeway there, and that's why I mentioned RCEP is a good example. RCEP is a good example where India had to walk out ultimately beyond making certain concessions. Right. I think in that sense, EU is a good model for us, and RCEP is something that Americans should look at in negotiating with India.
Well, gentlemen, I think all of you have really truly